concert hall was busy that evening, filled with people who loved music and admired skill and reputation. Many had come to see a well-known pianist who was famous not only for his talent, but also for his confidence that often crossed into arrogance. He had trained in elite institutions and performed on grand stages, and he carried himself as someone who believed his place above others was unquestionable. His name alone drew attention, and his presence commanded the room. Before a single note was played, among the crowd sat a simple woman named Clara, who worked quietly as a music librarian in a nearby town. She wore modest clothes and kept her hair neatly tied back. She did not look like someone who belonged in the center of attention. She had come to the concert not to be seen but to listen. Music had always been a part of her life, though few people knew how deeply it ran. She had studied piano seriously in her youth and shown remarkable promise, but life had taken her in a different direction, filled with responsibility, care, and quiet sacrifice. As the evening progressed, the arrogant pianist spoke to the audience between pieces, sharing stories of his achievements and his mastery. His words carried pride and a sense of superiority that some admired and others tolerated. He spoke about how true excellence required boldness, and how few people truly understood the discipline needed to reach the highest level. His tone suggested that anyone outside his circle of elite training could never fully grasp what real music demanded. At one point during the event, a discussion arose about interpretation and expression. The pianist claimed that only those with formal recognition and competitive success could truly deliver meaningful performance. He dismissed the idea that hidden or untrained talent could rival professional mastery. His words were met with polite applause, though some listeners felt discomfort at his certainty. Clara listened quietly, feeling a familiar tightening in her chest. She had heard similar attitudes before and had learned long ago not to challenge them. She knew her own history and the choices that led her away from the stage. She did not regret caring for family or choosing stability over ambition, yet moments like this reminded her of the part of herself she rarely shared. Still, she remained silent, content to let the music speak for itself. The pianist continued speaking, and then made a bold statement, saying that if anyone believed otherwise, they were welcome to prove it. His tone suggested confidence that no one would dare. A light laugh passed through the audience, and most assumed the comment was rhetorical. But the atmosphere shifted when someone near Clara whispered that she had once studied piano seriously. The remark was meant casually, yet it reached the ears of those around them. Soon attention turned toward Clara, not by her choice, but by the curiosity of others. A few people encouraged her, softly asking if she would consider playing. She shook her head gently, trying to decline. She said she was not a performer and that she had come only to listen. But the moment grew, and the pianist noticed the exchange with a smile that carried both amusement and challenge. He invited her forward, saying it would be interesting to hear a different perspective. His words sounded polite, but his expression revealed confidence that the outcome would only confirm his belief. He assumed that a simple woman without public recognition could not possibly match his skill. The invitation felt less like an offer, and more like a test he expected to win easily. Clara felt the weight of the room turn toward her, and her heart began to race. She had not played publicly in many years, and the thought filled her with fear. Yet she also felt a quiet resolve rising within her. She knew the piano well, and she knew herself. She understood that this was not about proving superiority, but about honoring the truth of her own experience. After a moment, she agreed quietly, not with defiance, but with calm acceptance. As she walked toward the piano, the pianist stepped aside with a confident gesture, offering her the seat. Some in the audience watched with anticipation, while others felt uneasy, sensing the imbalance of power in the moment. Clara sat down, slowly placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes briefly to center herself. The piano felt familiar beneath her fingers, like an old friend waiting patiently. She had not yet played a single note, and already the room held its breath. The pianist stood nearby, arms crossed, certain that whatever followed would reinforce his standing. Clara opened her eyes and prepared to play, not knowing how this moment would change the course of the evening or the lives of those listening. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As Clara sat at the piano, the room remained unusually quiet, and the kind of silence that forms when people are unsure of what will happen next settled gently around everyone present. The pianist stood a short distance away, watching her with calm confidence. He believed this moment would end quickly and return the focus to him. He had seen many amateurs attempt to rise to challenges and fail under pressure. In his mind, this situation was no different. Clara rested her hands lightly on the keys and took a slow breath. She was aware of every sound in the room and every movement of her own body. Her heart beat steadily and her thoughts turned inward. She remembered the countless hours she once spent practicing alone in small rooms, guided by teachers who believed in discipline and expression more than applause. She remembered learning to listen before playing and to feel the weight of each note before allowing it to sound. She began softly choosing a piece that required restraint rather than force. The first notes flowed gently, filling the hall with warmth rather than volume. A few audience members leaned forward almost without realizing it. The tone of the piano changed the atmosphere in a way that was subtle yet undeniable. The pianist raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised by the clarity of her touch, though he remained composed. As Clara continued her playing, her posture relaxed, and her movements became more fluid. She was no longer thinking about the audience or the challenge before her. She focused only on the conversation between her hands and the instrument. The music carried intention and control, shaped by years of understanding rather than recent performance. Each phrase felt deliberate and honest. The audience listened closely, and whispers faded as attention sharpened. People who had expected a brief and awkward attempt now found themselves drawn into the sound. There was no rush in her playing and no effort to impress. Instead, there was patience and depth. Emotions surfaced quietly without being forced. The pianist shifted his stance and uncrossed his arms, though his expression remained guarded. He could hear the difference between confidence and arrogance, and the music unfolding before him carried a confidence that did not seek approval. It unsettled him in a way he had not anticipated. He realized that Clara was not playing to compete, but to express something true. As the piece developed, it grew richer and more complex, revealing technical skill that could not be faked. The transitions were smooth and the dynamics carefully balanced. Those familiar with piano recognized the control required to maintain such consistency. The room felt smaller and more intimate, as if the music had drawn everyone into the same shared space. Clara allowed the music to rise and fall naturally, trusting the phrasing she had internalized long ago. She did not look toward the pianist or the crowd, and she did not hurry toward an ending. The sound filled the hall, evenly reaching every corner without strain. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence shaped by memory and instinct. The pianist felt a tightening in his chest as he listened more closely. He recognized the discipline in her playing and the depth of interpretation that came only from long experience. Doubts surfaced despite his efforts to dismiss them. He began to realize that his assumptions about her had been rooted in appearance and circumstance rather than truth. When Clara reached the final passage, she softened her touch, allowing the music to resolve gently. The last notes lingered in the air and faded naturally. She lifted her hands slowly and remained still for a moment. The silence that followed felt heavy and meaningful, as if the room needed time to absorb what had just occurred. No one spoke immediately, and the pianist remained motionless, processing the shift that had taken place. The audience looked between Clara and him, sensing that the balance of the moment had changed. What began as a challenge had turned into a revelation, and the confidence that once filled the stage now felt unsettled. Clara stood from the piano calmly and stepped back, allowing space without seeking reaction. She did not smile or bow, and she did not appear triumphant. Her expression was composed and reflective. She had played not to win, but to speak honestly through music, and she felt at peace with that choice. Applause began slowly, then grew as people found their voices again. The sound was sincere and filled with respect rather than excitement. Some audience members stood while others remained seated, clapping thoughtfully. The pianist watched the response with mixed emotions, recognizing that the moment no longer belonged solely to him. He approached the piano with measured steps and thanked Clara for playing. His tone was controlled, though something in his expression had softened. He admitted that her performance carried depth and clarity he had not expected. The words came carefully, as if he were choosing humility for the first time in that evening. Clara acknowledged his words with a quiet nod and returned to her seat. The room buzzed with low conversation as people reflected on what they had witnessed. Some spoke of the beauty of the music, while others discussed the assumptions that had been challenged. The atmosphere had shifted from admiration of reputation to respect for authenticity. The pianist took his place again at the piano, but the energy had changed. He felt the weight of comparison and the awareness that skill alone did not grant authority. He began to play, yet his confidence now felt different, more measured and introspective. He understood that something important had been revealed not only to the audience, but to himself. Clara listened from her seat, feeling a sense of quiet closure. She did not feel victory or satisfaction in proving someone wrong. Instead, she felt relief in having honored a part of herself she had kept hidden for too long. She knew this moment would not change her life suddenly, but it had affirmed something essential. As the concert continued, the audience remained attentive yet reflective. The duel that had been expected had transformed into a lesson without instruction. The contrast between arrogance and quiet mastery lingered in every note that followed. People would leave that evening with more than music in their minds. Clara understood that this was only one part of a larger journey, and that the consequences of this moment would unfold gradually. She did not seek recognition or apology, and she did not expect acknowledgement beyond respect. She simply knew that she had met the challenge with honesty and grace, and that was enough for now. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them after. The concert ended. People slowly began to leave the hall, still talking quietly about what they had witnessed. The usual excitement that followed a performance was replaced by thoughtful reflection. Many glanced toward Clara as they passed, offering small nods or gentle smiles. She accepted them politely but did not linger. She felt emotionally full and slightly tired, as if she had opened a door inside herself that had been closed for many years. Outside the hall, the night air felt cool and grounding. Clara walked alone toward the bus stop, replaying the sound of the piano in her mind. She did not think about the arrogant pianist or the audience reaction as much as she thought about the feeling of her hands on the keys and the calm that had settled over her while she played. It reminded her of who she had been before life became about practicality and quiet endurance. The following morning, she returned to her regular routine at the small local library where she worked. The space was quiet and familiar, filled with shelves and soft light. It was a place where she felt comfortable and unseen, yet even there something felt different. She noticed sounds more clearly and felt more present, as if the music from the night before had sharpened her awareness of the world around her. News of the concert spread faster than she expected. A colleague mentioned hearing about a surprising moment during the event and asked if she had attended. Clara hesitated, then answered honestly that she had played briefly. The response was one of surprise followed by curiosity. It was the first time she had spoken about her musical ability openly in years, and it felt both strange and relieving. Later that day, she received a message from the concert organizer thanking her for her participation and asking if she would consider playing again at a future event. Clara read the message several times before responding. She appreciated the kindness but felt uncertain about stepping further into visibility. She replied politely, saying she would need time to think. She understood that one performance did not require an immediate decision about her future. Meanwhile, the pianist experienced his own internal shift. He returned to his practice space feeling unsettled by the memory of Clara's performance. He replayed the sound in his mind, recognizing the depth and sincerity that had challenged his assumptions. He realized that his confidence had been built partly on comparison and validation, rather than pure connection to the music. In the days that followed, he practiced with a different mindset. He slowed down and listened more carefully to his own playing. He noticed areas where he rushed and where he relied on technique rather than feeling. The encounter with Clara had revealed a gap between mastery and meaning, and it forced him to confront a side of himself he had long avoided. Back in her apartment, Clara sat at her old upright piano one evening and played softly. The instrument was slightly out of tune, and the keys showed signs of age, but it felt like home. She allowed herself to explore pieces she had not touched in decades. Memories surfaced not with sadness but with gratitude. She realized that music had never judged her for stepping away, and it welcomed her back without question. As she played, she considered the possibility of sharing music again, not as competition or ambition, but as expression. She thought about the audience reaction not as praise, but as connection. The idea that her playing could reach others quietly resonated deeply. Yet she remained cautious, knowing how easily expectations could turn joy into pressure. A few days later, she received a message from the pianist himself. It was brief and respectful. He thanked her for the experience and acknowledged that it had challenged his perspective. He expressed interest in speaking further if she was open to it. Clara was surprised by the humility in his words and took time before responding. She eventually agreed to a conversation, not out of obligation, but curiosity. They met in a quiet cafe away from the concert setting. The pianist spoke honestly about his upbringing, training, and the pressure to maintain a certain image. He admitted that arrogance had become a shield and that the duel had exposed its weakness. Clara listened without judgment, sharing her own story of stepping away from music and finding fulfillment in a quieter life. The conversation was thoughtful and grounded, and neither sought dominance or validation. They spoke as two people shaped differently by the same art. The pianist expressed regret for the way he had framed the challenge, and Clara accepted his words without bitterness. She understood that growth often followed discomfort. After they parted, Clara felt lighter. The encounter had closed a loop she did not know was open. She returned home with a sense of clarity about what the piano meant to her now. It was no longer tied to proving worth or reclaiming a lost future, but to staying honest with herself. In the weeks that followed, she continued her routine while allowing space for music to re-enter her life gently. She played in the evenings and attended small local recitals, not as a participant, but as a listener. She found joy in being part of a musical community without expectation. People who recognized her from the concert occasionally approached her with admiration and encouragement. She accepted their words graciously while maintaining her boundaries. She did not rush to define herself as a performer again, and she did not retreat into invisibility either. She existed somewhere in between with balance and intention. Clara understood that the true impact of the duel was not the public moment, but the internal shift it sparked. She had faced a challenge rooted in arrogance with quiet confidence, and in doing so had reminded herself of her own depth. Whatever came next would be guided not by reaction, but by choice. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, in the weeks that followed, Clara felt as though her life had gained an extra layer of awareness that colored everything she did. Nothing dramatic had changed on the surface, yet internally she felt more awake, more present in each moment. She moved through her days at the library with the same quiet dedication, but her thoughts were no longer drifting away from herself. The music she had played in the concert hall seemed to echo softly in her mind, reminding her that a part of her long-kept private was still very much alive. She began waking earlier in the mornings, not out of restlessness but clarity. The early hours felt peaceful and unclaimed, and she often sat at her piano before leaving for work. These sessions were not long and not structured, yet they felt deeply meaningful. She played slowly, exploring tone and touch rather than pieces or perfection. This gentle return helped her reconnect without pressure or expectation at work. Colleagues continued to show curiosity, though most respected her calm boundaries. Some asked about her musical past, while others simply treated her with a new warmth, as if seeing her more clearly now. Clara noticed how easily people created assumptions, and how quickly those assumptions could shift when given even a small glimpse of truth. This awareness deepened her empathy and made her more attentive to those around her who might also carry unseen stories. The concert organizer reached out again, asking if she might consider participating in a small community music evening designed to bring people together rather than showcase professional performance. The idea resonated with Clara more than earlier invitations. It felt aligned with how she now viewed music as connection rather than competition. Still, she asked for time to reflect because she wanted to be sure that her choice came from intention rather than reaction. During this time, the pianist also experienced visible changes in his public demeanor. Those who attended his later performances noticed a shift in his tone and presence. He spoke less about himself and more about the music and the composers. His playing carried greater sensitivity and restraint, and critics remarked on the emotional depth of his recent work. Though few knew the source of this transformation, Clara recognized it quietly when she attended one of his concerts. As an anonymous listener sitting among the audience, she listened carefully and felt a sense of mutual respect rather than rivalry. She understood that the encounter they shared had shaped them both in different ways, and she felt no need to reclaim the spotlight or revisit the challenge. The music itself felt like the resolution. One afternoon, Clara visited her former piano teacher, who was now retired and living in a small town nearby. They had not spoken in many years, yet the reunion was warm and filled with shared memory. Clara spoke honestly about her life choices and the recent concert. Her teacher listened with pride and reassurance, reminding her that music was never a narrow path, and that its value was not diminished by time away. The visit stirred emotions Clara had not allowed herself to fully process before. She realized how much she had carried quietly and how little she had acknowledged her own resilience. Returning home, she felt grounded and affirmed in her identity, not as someone who had lost a dream, but as someone who had lived fully in multiple roles. She agreed to perform at the community music evening, choosing pieces that felt reflective and sincere rather than technically demanding. Preparation felt calm and focused, and she practiced with ease, trusting her instincts. The venue was small and welcoming, and the audience diverse, including families, students, and older listeners. Clara felt no fear as she played, only a sense of shared presence. The response was warm and genuine, and several people approached her afterward, expressing how the music made them feel seen or understood. These conversations touched her deeply because they reflected the kind of impact she valued most. She returned home that night feeling content and certain that her relationship with music had found a new and meaningful form. As the months passed, Clara continued to integrate music into her life without allowing it to dominate or disappear. She volunteered, occasionally teaching basic piano skills at a local community center, and found joy in encouraging beginners. She emphasized listening, patience, and curiosity rather than achievement, and watched students grow more confident not only musically, but personally. She noticed how music sharpened her listening skills in everyday life as well. Conversations felt richer and silences more comfortable. She became more attentive to tone and rhythm in speech and behavior. This sensitivity helped her navigate relationships with greater understanding and care. Clara also began writing reflections about her experiences, not as a public record, but as a personal practice. Writing helped her clarify what the duel had revealed, and how arrogance and humility often existed closer together than people realized. She understood that confidence rooted in comparison was fragile, while confidence rooted in self-awareness was resilient occasionally. She crossed paths with the pianist at cultural events, and their interactions were cordial and respectful. They did not revisit the duel directly, yet there was mutual understanding in their exchanges. Each had grown beyond the moment and carried its lesson forward quietly. Clara no longer felt defined by simplicity or modest appearance. She embraced those qualities as part of her identity rather than limitations. She recognized that strength often appeared understated, and that mastery did not require performance to be valid. Looking ahead, she did not feel the need to plan or predict where music might take her next. She trusted that opportunities aligned with her values would emerge naturally, and that she could choose them without fear. The piano was no longer a test or a memory, but a companion supporting her ongoing growth in this stage of her journey. Clara felt balanced, grounded, and quietly confident. She had met arrogance with grace and emerged not triumphant but whole. The duel that once seemed like a challenge had become a turning point, leading her back to herself with honesty and peace. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As Clara continued forward, she noticed that the rhythm of her life had settled into something steady and reassuring. Music no longer arrived as a sudden interruption, but as a quiet presence woven naturally into her days. She returned to the library each morning with the same dedication, yet her inner world felt richer and more spacious. She understood now that reclaiming a part of herself did not require abandoning the life she had built, but rather allowing both to exist side by side. Her involvement at the community center deepened over time. What began as occasional volunteering slowly became a regular commitment. Children and adults alike gathered each week, eager to learn and explore sound. Clara approached each session with patience and warmth, never presenting herself as an expert, but as a guide walking alongside them. She remembered how intimidating music education could feel, and made it a priority to create an atmosphere free of judgment. Many of the participants came from backgrounds where access to music had been limited. Clara recognized familiar patterns of hesitation and self-doubt in them. She gently encouraged curiosity over correctness, and reminded them that mistakes were part of listening and learning. Watching their confidence grow brought her a quiet joy that felt different from applause, yet more enduring at the same time. Invitations to perform continued to arrive occasionally. Clara learned to choose carefully, saying yes only when the setting aligned with her values. She declined events that framed music as competition or spectacle, and accepted those that emphasized connection, reflection, or service. This discernment helped her maintain balance and avoid the pressure that once pulled her away from music. Years ago, the pianist who had challenged her continued his own journey of reflection and change. Their paths crossed from time to time, and each meeting was marked by mutual respect rather than comparison. Clara noticed that his presence felt less imposing now and more thoughtful. She sensed that the lesson they had shared continued to shape his approach to music and life. One evening, after a community workshop, Clara sat alone at her piano, feeling both tired and fulfilled. She played slowly, allowing the sound to settle into the room. She reflected on how differently she now related to the instrument. It was no longer tied to proving worth or reclaiming lost potential, but to presence and honesty. She felt grateful for the years of distance, because they had taught her how deeply music could live within her without demanding attention. As months passed, Clara began mentoring a young volunteer who showed interest in teaching music but lacked confidence. She recognized herself in the hesitation and offered gentle guidance. Their conversations were grounded and sincere, and Clara found fulfillment in sharing not only skills but perspective. She emphasized that growth did not follow a straight line, and that patience mattered as much as effort. Her writing practice also deepened during this period. She continued journaling about her experiences and insights, and found clarity in putting words to lessons learned. Writing became another form of listening, allowing her to process emotion and memory with care. She did not share these reflections publicly, but they shaped how she approached both music and relationships at the library. Clara noticed subtle changes in how she interacted with visitors. She listened more attentively and responded with greater presence. People often lingered longer in conversation and shared small stories they might otherwise have kept to themselves. Clara understood that her renewed connection to music had sharpened her capacity for empathy and awareness. One afternoon, a group of local educators invited her to speak informally about using music as a tool for emotional expression and learning. Clara hesitated at first, unsure if her experience qualified her for such a role, but she accepted, recognizing that her perspective was rooted in lived experience rather than theory. The conversation was thoughtful and collaborative, and she felt valued not as a performer, but as a listener and facilitator. The experience reaffirmed her belief that music served many purposes beyond the stage. It could create space for understanding, healing, and connection. This realization guided her choices moving forward and helped her resist the pull of external validation. There were still moments of doubt, especially on quiet evenings, when she wondered what her life might have been had she followed a different path earlier. But these thoughts no longer carried regret. She saw her journey as layered rather than lost and understood that each chapter contributed to her ability to give meaning to the present. Clara also learned to rest without guilt. She allowed herself evenings away from the piano and days without obligation. She understood now that rest sustained creativity rather than threatened it. This balance kept her grounded and protected the joy she had rediscovered. As the year drew on, she looked back at the night of the duel with a sense of calm distance. It no longer defined her or demanded explanation. It had simply opened a door she chose to walk through at her own pace. The arrogance she had faced had dissolved into humility, not through confrontation, but through honesty and grace. Clara felt confident in the quiet choices she continued to make. She trusted her intuition and respected her limits. Music remained a companion, guiding her through complexity without overwhelming her. She had learned that fulfillment did not require visibility or triumph, but alignment between values and action. In this stage of her life, Clara felt steady and whole. She carried her simplicity with pride and her depth without apology. The piano no longer represented a challenge to be. Without apology. The piano no longer represented a challenge to be met, but a language she spoke fluently and gently. And as she moved forward, she did so with clarity, patience, and a deep respect for the journey that had brought her here. As Clara moved deeper into this season of her life, she began to notice how her sense of purpose had shifted from discovery to stewardship. What once felt like a fragile return to music now felt stable and rooted. She no longer worried about whether she belonged in musical spaces, because she understood that belonging came from sincerity rather than permission. This understanding gave her a quiet confidence that shaped how she approached each day. Her work at the community center expanded gradually. More people attended sessions not because of reputation, but because the space felt safe and welcoming. Clara continued to emphasize listening over performance and encouraged participants to explore sound as a form of expression rather than achievement. She watched people of all ages grow more comfortable with themselves as they learned to trust their instincts. These moments affirmed her belief that music could be a tool for self-understanding rather than comparison. At the same time, she became more aware of her own limits. There were weeks when requests for her time increased, and she felt the familiar pull to say yes to everything. Instead, she practiced discernment, choosing commitments that aligned with her values and declining others with kindness. This was not always easy, yet it protected her energy and allowed her to remain present where she was most effective. The library remained an important anchor in her life. The quiet order of shelves and familiar routines grounded her when other parts of her world felt full. Colleagues noticed her steady demeanor and often sought her out for conversation. Clara listened attentively and responded with care, recognizing that presence itself was a form of service. She understood now that the attentiveness she practiced in music translated naturally into how she engaged with people. Her personal relationship with the piano continued to evolve. She practiced less frequently but with greater intention. Each session felt purposeful and reflective rather than driven by habit. She explored pieces slowly and allowed silence to exist between phrases. This restraint mirrored how she lived, choosing depth over volume and meaning over speed. During this period, Clara faced an unexpected challenge when the community center experienced funding uncertainty that threatened to reduce programming. She felt concern not only for her own involvement, but for the participants who relied on the space for connection and growth. Rather than reacting with fear, she chose to engage constructively. She met with organizers and offered support through ideas, collaboration, and patience. She spoke openly about the impact she had witnessed and shared stories of quiet transformation rather than dramatic outcomes. Her calm persistence influenced discussions and helped shift the focus from loss to possibility. While not every issue was resolved immediately, the conversations strengthened relationships and reinforced the value of collective effort. Emotionally, this period brought reflection. Clara found herself thinking more often about her earlier years and the choices she had made. She no longer framed those choices as sacrifices, but as acts of care that shaped her resilience. She understood that stepping away from music had taught her humility, patience, and endurance, qualities that now defined her work far more than technical skill alone. One evening after a long day, she sat alone at the piano and played a piece she once performed competitively in her youth. The notes felt different now, less urgent and more reflective. She did not aim for perfection and allowed small imperfections to exist. This acceptance felt liberating and confirmed that her relationship with music had matured beyond external standards. Her interactions with the pianist who once challenged her remained respectful and infrequent. They exchanged brief words at cultural events and acknowledged each other with warmth rather than comparison. Clara sensed that the encounter had reshaped his path as well, and she felt no need to revisit the past. The lesson had already settled into both their lives. Clara also noticed how her story resonated quietly with others. People sometimes shared their own experiences of setting aside passions due to responsibility and finding ways back later in life. She listened without offering solutions, knowing that each journey unfolded differently. Her presence alone seemed to offer reassurance that time did not erase possibility. She continued mentoring volunteers and young educators, sharing insights about balance, patience, and self-trust. These conversations felt reciprocal as she learned from their perspectives as well. Clara valued this exchange and recognized that growth was sustained through shared learning rather than authority. Rest became an intentional practice during this stage. She allowed herself time away from commitments without guilt and trusted that stillness supported creativity rather than diminished it. Long walks, quiet evenings, and unstructured time replenished her energy and clarified her priorities. As seasons changed, Clara felt increasingly aligned with her life. She no longer felt pulled between simplicity and depth because she understood they could coexist. Her days were not defined by dramatic milestones, but by consistency and care. This steadiness brought peace and resilience. Looking ahead, she did not set rigid plans or goals. She trusted that opportunities aligned with her values would continue to appear, and that she could meet them with clarity. Music remained a guiding presence, not as an obligation, but as a companion that shaped how she listened, responded, and lived. In this phase of her journey, Clara felt grounded and whole. She had moved beyond the need to prove anything and embraced the responsibility of nurturing what mattered. The piano stood not as a symbol of regret or triumph, but as a quiet witness to a life lived with intention, balance, and grace. As Clara continued along this path, she noticed that her sense of identity had become calmer and more integrated than ever before. She no longer separated herself into different versions for work, music, or community. Everything felt connected by the same values of care, patience, and honesty. This integration brought a deep sense of ease that allowed her to move through challenges without losing balance. The community center programs had grown strong roots, and new facilitators were now involved, sharing responsibility. Clara supported them without controlling the direction. She trusted the foundation they had built together. Watching others step into leadership filled her with quiet pride, because it meant the work was no longer dependent on her presence alone. This was something she had learned to value deeply. Students who once arrived hesitant now showed confidence not only in music, but in how they spoke and listened. Clara observed how learning an instrument had helped them develop discipline, focus, and empathy. She understood that these changes would carry into their lives in ways far beyond the classroom. This awareness reaffirmed her commitment, even during moments of fatigue. At the library, she was offered an opportunity to help design small cultural programs that blended literature and music. The idea felt like a natural extension of her interests and skills. She collaborated with colleagues to create quiet events that encouraged reflection and dialogue. These gatherings were modest, yet meaningful, and attracted people who valued depth over spectacle. Her own musical practice remained steady and intentional. She no longer felt the need to play daily, but when she did, she was fully present. Sometimes she explored new pieces, and other times she returned to familiar ones, listening for how they felt different now. She recognized that music reflected her inner state and allowed her to understand herself more clearly. There were moments when exhaustion surfaced, and she questioned whether her pace was sustainable. Instead of pushing through, she paused and reassessed her commitments. This self-awareness allowed her to adjust without guilt and to ask for help when needed. She had learned that resilience included knowing when to rest. The pianist who once challenged her reached out again during this period, inviting her to attend a small private recital, focused on collaboration rather than performance. Clara accepted with curiosity and attended as a listener. The atmosphere was relaxed and thoughtful, and the music felt exploratory rather than competitive. She appreciated the shift and recognized how both of them had grown since their first encounter. After the recital, they spoke briefly about music and teaching, sharing insights without hierarchy. There was mutual respect and an unspoken understanding that the moment of challenge had transformed into a shared lesson. Clara left feeling grateful for the experience, not because it elevated her, but because it clarified her values. As months passed, Clara noticed that people sought her guidance not for answers, but for perspective. She offered reflections grounded in experience rather than instruction. She emphasized listening, patience, and alignment with personal values. These conversations reinforced her belief that wisdom grew from lived experience and openness, rather than authority. She also spent more time reflecting privately through writing and quiet walks. These moments allowed her to process subtle emotions and maintain clarity. She wrote about the difference between ambition and purpose, and how the latter sustained energy while the former often drained it. These reflections shaped how she approached future decisions. One afternoon, a former student returned to thank her and shared how music had helped them navigate a difficult period. The conversation was brief yet deeply meaningful. Clara felt moved knowing that her presence had made a difference in ways she might never fully see. She carried this gratitude with humility and resolve. Her days continued to unfold with gentle rhythm. There were no dramatic milestones, yet each day felt purposeful. She understood that fulfillment was not about constant growth, but about steady alignment with what mattered most. This realization brought peace and confidence. Clara no longer felt defined by simplicity or modest appearance. She embraced those qualities as expressions of clarity rather than limitation. She understood that depth often existed beneath quiet surfaces, and that true mastery did not require display. As she looked ahead, she felt neither urgency nor fear. She trusted her ability to respond thoughtfully to whatever came next. Music remained a steady companion guiding how she listened and engaged with the world. She felt whole in a way that did not depend on recognition or comparison. In this stage of her life, Clara had moved beyond the moment of challenge into a place of integration and service. She carried her experiences with grace and allowed them to inform her choices without controlling them. The piano stood nearby not as a symbol of rivalry or regret, but as a reminder of authenticity and quiet strength. She continued forward with patience, clarity, and compassion, confident that her path, though simple, was deeply meaningful, and that the lessons she carried would continue to shape her life and the lives of others in ways both seen and unseen. As Clara moved into the later stretch of her journey, she felt a quiet sense of arrival, not as a destination, but as an understanding that her life now reflected her values with honesty and care. The days no longer felt divided between who she was and who she wanted to be. Everything flowed together with purpose. She continued her work at the library, her involvement in community music, and her private moments at the piano, without feeling pulled in competing directions. The programs she helped nurture had grown strong enough to continue with shared leadership, and Clara stepped back just enough to allow others to shape the future. She remained available for guidance, but trusted the foundation that had been built. Seeing others carry the work forward filled her with gratitude rather than loss, because it meant the impact extended beyond her own presence. Students and participants who once needed reassurance now offered it to others, and Clara watched this with quiet pride. She saw how confidence grew through patience and consistency, and how music became a way for people to understand themselves and one another. These moments reminded her that true success often appeared in subtle changes, rather than public recognition. Her own relationship with music settled into something deeply personal and steady. She practiced when she felt called and rested when she felt full. The piano no longer demanded anything from her, and she did not demand anything from it. This mutual ease allowed her to stay connected without pressure, and to listen more deeply both in sound and in silence. Occasionally, she accepted invitations to play at meaningful gatherings, and each time she chose pieces that felt honest and reflective. Her performances were calm and grounded, and audiences listened with attention rather than expectation. Clara felt content knowing that her music offered presence rather than display, and that was enough. The pianist who once challenged her remained a respectful figure in her wider circle. Their interactions were brief, yet warm and marked by mutual understanding. The moment that once carried tension had transformed into a shared lesson that no longer needed words. Clara appreciated this quiet resolution and carried it with humility. In her personal life, Clara embraced simplicity with confidence. She enjoyed routines, long walks, quiet evenings, and unhurried conversations. She noticed how her listening skills had deepened, and how people felt at ease sharing their thoughts with her. She understood that music had shaped her ability to hear beyond words and to respond with care. She continued writing, privately reflecting on what the duel had revealed, and how easily arrogance and humility could shift when faced with authenticity. These reflections helped her remain grounded and guided her choices when new opportunities arose. She trusted her intuition and respected her limits without guilt. As time passed, Clara no longer thought of her story as unusual or dramatic. It felt human and familiar, shaped by responsibility, choice, and quiet courage. She recognized that many people carried hidden depth, and that a single moment of attention could change how a life unfolded. This awareness strengthened her commitment to seeing others fully. One evening, she returned alone to the concert hall where everything had once shifted. The space was empty and still, and she sat at the piano without expectation. She played softly, letting gratitude fill the room. She felt no desire to reclaim the stage or revisit the challenge. The music was simply a reflection of where she stood now, calm, whole, and present. As she left the hall, she felt a deep sense of peace. She understood that her journey had not been about defeating arrogance or proving talent, but about returning to herself with honesty. The challenge that once felt imposed had become a gift that revealed her strength and clarity. Clara continued forward, carrying her past, present, and future together without conflict. Music remained a companion, shaping how she listened and lived. She did not seek more than what aligned with her values, and she welcomed each day with openness. Her life stood as a quiet reminder that true mastery often spoke softly, and that authenticity could transform both the one who played and those who listened. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. Rewrite the content without them.